gonna be cooking all day.
All right, hello and good evening, everyone. Welcome back after 2 days of break. Here we are once again with another session of MEG2. We are somewhat midway in our series and we have a few more days left, and let's continue from where we left with our daily affairs. All right, I can see close to 50 people in the house. Maybe others are just a bit lost and confused regarding the dates. Maybe they had missed my last class and were confused with no class over the last 2 days, probably. Nonetheless, let's hope that others would also join us, and hope you're all keeping good. And before we get started, a couple of things or updates regarding what's going on here. It's been raining. It has been heavy rainfall in Kerala over the last 3 days or so, which means the network conditions have also been on and off. So, just in case So, just in case I get logged out in between, please be patient. I promise you that I'll come back as soon as it is possible. But, yep, in general, I believe that it'll take some time. There's a probability that sometimes in between I may experience network issues today. So, please be patient. As of now, everything is fair and fine, so there is nothing really to worry about, and we are all but set and ready to go. And as we get started with, I'd like to share the links of a couple of videos with you. If you remember, in our last classes, we dealt with Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark, and I'd like to share a couple of videos related to that play. Again, I have shared the general link with you before so that you would have this channel with you. But then, just in case you are missing out, these are two videos from Crash Course Theatre. You may go back and have a look at it. Deals with ghosts, murder, Ophelia Gertrude, and so on. So you may go back to those videos as and when you feel like, and you can have a look at this and have fun. All right. So let's get the day started. Welcome back, everybody. And I had promised you that today, when we meet after 2 days of break, 2 days of interval, we'll deal with a play named Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw. And speaking about Pygmalion, um, it's a huge leap from the Shakespearean play. So I simply cannot quickly jump deep into Pygmalion. Before jumping into Pygmalion, becomes a requisite that I deal with some basic background before we move on to Pygmalion. So just give me a second. I'm trying to mm, share my screen. All right. I hope that's on here. Just a second. Mm, so many people still trying to join. Let me just let them in. Give me a second. All right. So, yep. So I'd also like to share one more link with you. I had forgotten about that for a while. Mm, just a second. I'd like to share one more link with you. I'd be, in fact, briefing a part of what's there in it, and I'd rather go into the outlines of the same. You may go back and listen to these videos as and when you get time. So, just a second. All right. Yep. So I'm sharing one more video with you that says English theater after Shakespeare. It deals with Ben Jonson, whose Alchemist is prescribed for you, The Alchemist. And it also deals with a playwright like John Webster, whose Duchess of Malfi is a worth read, even though that's not there in your syllabus. Duchess of Malfi is such a compelling watch if you want to go to YouTube and watch the play. And it also speaks about Icar Jones, who brought in a lot of changes to English theatre in terms of stage settings. And in the year 1640, it so happened that a civil war broke out in England, and resultantly in 1642, the theatres were closed. So, for the first 10-15 minutes, I'll be discussing with you a little bit of a little bit on the evolution of theatre since Shakespeare up and until George Bernard Shaw. I'm sure that background is required because uh, not for your exam as such, but then if you go for an interview or if you want to learn literature in deep, these changes should not go unnoticed. So, to begin with, as you know, we were discussing Renaissance theatre so far. So, after William Shakespeare, Shakespeare, the next renowned playwright is Ben Jonson. And the point to be noted is he doesn't have an H. It's Jonson. So Ben Jonson was the next prominent playwright who came into the fore. And he was a close friend of William Shakespeare. And it was, in fact, he who wrote the epitaph of Shakespeare. When Shakespeare died, the engravings on his stone was penned by Ben Jonson. Blessed be those who spare these bones, and so on and on and on. So Ben Jonson is a renowned playwright. Shakespeare acted in a few of his plays as well, especially Every Man in His Humor. Shakespeare played a small role there. And Ben Jonson is mainly known for what is called as the humorous comedy. And that video tells you in detail what humors are. Four to five humors that is part of our body, and the inequilibrium in those humors adds to certain traits or attributes in us. So those things are detailed in that video. You may go back and refer to that video later. I'm not wasting our precious time delving deep into that video. But then post Johnsonian era. Of course, Webster was also there. And like I told you, in the year 1642, um, there was a civil war as a result of which Charles I, who was the king back then, was assassinated, was guillotined by the protesters, and eventually the protectorate under Oliver Cromwell came into existence. The Puritan rule, a highly religious way of living, came into existence in England since the year 1640. And what happened after that is that um, theaters were subsequently closed in the year 1642. It's purely because the Puritans believed that theater is a way of misleading people, and artists are generally reckless, and they are not they don't live a devoted life. They have a laissez-faire way of life. Laissez-faire means seize the moment, eat, drink, marry. So Puritan theories were entirely opposed to this. So in the year 1642, theaters were shut in England. For the next 2 decades, almost 2 decades, what England witnessed was the Puritan rule under Oliver Cromwell. Uh, One of the most most renowned supporters of Cromwell's protectorate was none other than uh, the poet John Milton. John Milton was such an admirer of Oliver Cromwell's protectorate. He served as a minister in that, and for 18 years, England had to bear with this Puritan rule. And in the year 1658, Oliver Cromwell passed away, and his son Richard Cromwell took charge. And the point to be noted is that unlike Oliver Cromwell, Richard Cromwell was not that good a ruler. And by then, the Britishers were fed up with the Britishers were fed up with what may be called as this protectorate rule, because a highly religious way of living, devoid of entertainment of any sort, had started to bore them. So 18 years into the Cromwellian rule, Charles II, the son of deceased Charles I, who had escaped to France, came back from France to England and was immediately made the Emperor of England. So thereby overthrowing Richard Cromwell's rule. This historical phenomena is regarded as restoration, and that period is called as Restoration period. And if you ask me why the term restoration is being used, monarchy was restored, and that's why it is called Restoration period. By putting an end to the protectorate of Oliver Cromwell and Richard Cromwell, monarchy was restored in England, and hence that period is known as Restoration period, the period from 1660 onwards, 1660. It's called as Restoration period. And like I told you in the previous class, these labelings are for convenience. It can also be looked at from various perspectives, and you can have different names. Based on the literary phenomena during that period, it was called neoclassical period because there was a classical reawakening in order to satirize during that period. There was a trend, the literary trend of that age. So it's called as neoclassical age, also simultaneously called as the Augustan age. It's also called as age of age of Pope, age of Dryden, age of Johnson. Here it is Dr. Samuel Johnson, age of Johnson, age of Swift, and so on and on and on. And there are also so many other names, titles related to this. And Age of Satires is one such name. That age is also known as the Age of Novel or the Rise of Novel. MEG3 would begin with discussions on the rise of the novel. I hope anytime I would have dealt with it in detail, the phenomenon of the rise of the novel and how the early half of 17th century or the mid half of 17th century, 18th century, I'm sorry, saw with the rise of the novel. Okay, so these are some technical terms associated with it. You can go back and have a look at that. I'm not dealing in detail with this, but I'm just trying to make you familiar with the changes in drama. So during the Restoration period, the drama of that period is called or is often addressed as Restoration drama or Restoration theatre. And when Charles II came back from France, it led to significant changes in arts, especially theatre in England. Because Charles II was someone who loved art and artists. He loved and encouraged playwrights. So when he came back from France, he brought along with him a group of actors and actresses and theater groups, theatrical people. And okay, and when he brought, I mean, what happened is that by then in France, actresses were introduced onto the stage. Drop curtain came into existence. So when Charles II came back to England and was part of the restoration process by assuming the charge of the king, the emperor, the ruler, uh, he also introduced these changes to the British theatre, which was closed for 18 years, mind you. From 1642 to 1660, the theatre remained closed in England. So that theatre was revived. So it's also a revival of English theatre. So the Restoration theatre had certain features that Shakespearean theatre did not have. For instance, it had female actresses to play the female roles. Similarly, it also had a drop curtain and other settings to enhance theatre experience. Music was also added slowly to the theatrical process. So theatre became a bit more engaging and engrossing and less boring than it was before. I hope the point is clear. So when Charles II came back, he took great steps to promote arts and culture. He encouraged the playwrights in his plays, and he also tried to build a sort of participatory theater into existence. And if not participatory, at least an attractive theater. But then I must say that initially the actresses were generally of low grade. People from lower class or people who were prostitutes took it to acting. It was indeed a highly non glamorous position. Acting was not women's cup of tea unless they were of a lower birth or of a lower profession. And it continued to be so for a longer period of time. And Thus, when we speak about restoration drama or restoration theatre, it emerged in twofold. One is called heroic drama, and the other is called comedy of manners. You may be familiar with these terms. If not, you can go back and Google it and get to know about the features of this. Heroic drama is a concept uh, introduced by the poet John Dryden, who back then also wrote a few plays. So John Dryden wrote a few plays which were in the heroic fold. It was basically about chivalry and winning the princes, and there was some fairy tale elements to it. That's called heroic drama. But then the reason why we remember heroic drama is also because, just like we speak about the blank verse when we speak about Christopher Marlowe and William Shakespeare, um, John Dryden introduced to the theatric world another form called heroic couplets. So heroic couplets was widely used by John Dryden. He used the heroic verse to write heroic drama, and his plays were popular also because of that literal content in it. Then came a person like William Congreve. Primarily, we associate the comedy of manners with sorry, comedy of manners with William Congreve. William Congreve emerged in the latter half of 1660s, 70s, and he wrote four plays. You may go back and refer to the list from Google. The last of that play is regarded as the best of the comedy of manners play. The play is titled The Way of the World. uh, The Way of the World is the best of the best comedy of manners plays. And by manners comedy, as the name title suggests, manners comedy is where the playwright ridicules the manners, the high class manners of a society. Typical England society, who had by the time of Restoration became so pompous and of a show of kind. Like I told you, for 18 years they lived in restraint. So by the time Charles II came back, again alcoholism started to loom large, prostitution became popular, and these deviant ways became a popular trend. And along with it came this sophistication of British society, which again reached its height by the time it reached the Victorian era. The British sophisticism, especially in terms of high class manners, started to become evident from the Restoration era. And playwrights like William Congreve ridiculed the ways and manners in which the English society lived. And you know what class is: the high class, middle class, low class gentry. And the high class expects people to behave in a polished manner, to dress up in certain ways, and to flaunt what they have, including their jewelry, whatever they have. So this was ridiculed by William Congreve. His play The Way of the World, published in the year 1700, was an instant failure. Though later we look back at that play and say that it is an epic in comedy of manners. At the time of its presentation, it was considered to be an absolute failure. And that was also because in the year 1698, a person like Jeremy Collier wrote a political pamphlet titled On Immorality and Profaneness on the English Stage. Immorality and profaneness means boshku parachil, veembu parachil, to show off. Yeah. So on immorality and profaneness on the English stage, that's the name of the pamphlet written by Jeremy Collier, in which he accuses both Dryden and Congreve to be uh, people who uh, reduce the level of comedy to such flimsy needs like adult rated comedies and തറപ്പണി ചെയ്യുന്നതിനായിട്ട് കോമഡി ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നു അല്ലെങ്കിൽ നാടകത്തെ ഉപയോഗിക്കുന്നു എന്ന് ജെറമി കോളിയർ അക്യൂസ് ചെയ്തു. And this accusation was accepted by Dryden. Dryden accepted Collier's accuse and said, I apologize. I realized when I look back that I had done this. Whereas William Congreve shrugged off Collier's views and held the view that a good comedy may sometimes have a few innuendos and a few jokes and blah blah blah. And he went on to write The Way of the World in 1700, but maybe owing to the attack of Collier, the play was an instant failure in the year 1700. So the result of that failure was that William Congreve bid goodbye to playwriting. William Congreve stopped writing plays anymore. That's why he's credited only with 4 plays. If you look at Google, he has written only 4 plays, and the last is the best of the plays. But because it was a flop, William Congreve stopped writing plays and he took a due. And then emerged another genre called sentimental plays. Sometimes they are also referred to as sentimental comedies. Sentimental drama, that's a better word, I'm sorry, than plays. I think sentimental drama would be a better word. So, what is a sentimental drama? A sentimental drama emerged, as I told you, in the backdrop of the accusations made on William Congreve and similar folks. So, just a second. Yeah, a couple of people still coming in. All right. So, sentimental drama was in fact a response to what may be called as um, what may be called as a response to this attack on comedy of manners. So the obscenity and jokes in comedy was replaced by sentimentality. And I'd like to spend a little bit of time showing you a few videos today. I've shared a lot of links, but these 2 videos are significant because we have to discuss a few things before we move on to Pygmalion. So I'm going to share my screen and show you a video on the rise of sentimental theatre in England. So here we go. Yep.
I'm Mike Rignetta. This is Crash Course Theater, and Yorick brought tissues today because we are taking on a sentimental tragedy, which is gonna make you cry. And we're also taking on sentimental comedy, which will also make you cry. We are back in England, too, and I'm sorry to tell you that after all that Restoration smuttiness, the 18th century theater had a moral crisis. Good characters should be rewarded, they said, and bad characters should be punished, they claimed. Adultery and venereal disease, not cool, they griped. Also, Parliament was like, maybe.
Well, that's one point I missed out. In Comedy of Manners, there was plenty of references to adultery, premarital and postmarital relationships, and so on, which also did not go well with a moral Puritan population who is still alive in England.
Maybe what we need is a lot more censorship and fewer theaters. Have they learned nothing? Well, it was lewd while it lasted, friends. Lights up. Before we get to the really sad stuff, we're going to look at sentimental comedy, the only kind of sad genre that replaced Restoration comedy. Today, sentimental means corny or sappy, overly emotional in a bad way. 18th century writers used it to mean all of that same stuff, but in a good way. By exciting emotions like pity or sorrow, playwrights thought that they could encourage an audience to make better moral choices. So, yeah, pretty different from Restoration comedy, which was witty, rascally, and deeply cynical about human nature and society. And I mean, when you've just come through an intensely horrible and bloody civil war, you might be feeling a wee bit disillusioned. But sentimental comedy is all about re-illusionment. Which illusions, you might ask? Well, I'm glad you did. Sentimental comedy promotes the Enlightenment idea that people are mostly good unless they encounter bad influences. In plays by Richard Steele and his contemporaries, good people triumph over adversity and bad people get their comeuppance. Funny stuff is reserved for servants. Marriage is, once again, the happy ending. The best-known sentimental comedy is Richard Steele's 1722 play, The Conscious Lovers, which is based on a comedy of Terence. I'm sure you are shocked to learn. In this comedy, the poor but virtuous Indiana isn't able to marry the man she loves because she's a dowryless orphan. There are a lot of couples and a lot of complications and a lot of interfering relatives. And then at the end, Indiana drops a bracelet and it turns out she's rich after all. Then it's conscious coupling for everyone. So, okay, it's a comedy, but is it funny? Not really. Steele wrote in a preface that he wanted to create a pleasure too exquisite for laughter. How English. Also, for the record, Steele's own idea of pleasure included drinking and dueling, so maybe not the best dude to be writing for yucks. Oliver Goldsmith would later criticize sentimental comedy for not being fun enough, but still, these plays allowed audiences to have a good cry and do some serious virtue signaling. If you were moved, it meant that you had a good and tender heart. People with good and tender hearts don't giggle. Sentimental plays aren't hilarious, though some of the funny is restored when sentimental comedy evolves into the laughing comedies, or the comedies of manners that Oliver Goldsmith and Richard Brinsley Sheridan wrote. You want to know what was even less funny than a pleasure too exquisite for laughter? Bourgeois tragedy, the sad ending version of sentimental comedy. Greek tragedy and Shakespearean tragedy weren't all that invested in teaching moral lessons, unless those lessons are that the universe is cruel and players gotta play, so just get on with it, Hamlet. Bourgeois tragedy is all about using recognizable characters and situations to school the audience in appropriate behavior, mostly by showing them that inappropriate behavior gets you hanged. Bourgeois tragedy did this by encouraging the audience to identify with the tragic hero. As Adam Smith writes in the 1759 Theory of Moral Sentiments, "My thesis is that our fellow feeling for the misery of others comes from our imaginatively changing places with the sufferer, thereby coming to conceive what he feels, or even to feel what he feels." The audience was urged to imaginatively change places with the sufferer and feel all of his difficult feelings. This move would prompt the audience to make better moral choices, avoiding miserable feelings in real life. To help with the place changing, writers of sentimental tragedies often looked to newspapers and ballads instead of myths and legends. They wanted their tragedies to relate directly to the middle-class people watching them, so they wrote about contemporary merchants and tradesmen instead of ancient nobles and gods. The playwright George Lillo defended this choice, which was controversial at the time, saying, "It is more truly great to be the instrument of good to many who stand in need of our assistance than to a very small part of that number." Let's look at Lillo's most famous tragedy, the 1731 play The London Merchant. Lillo based his play on a real 17th century murder, which had become the subject of a popular ballad. On opening night, the crowd was like, "Writing a tragedy based on a ballad about an apprentice? So lame." They came to laugh at his play, but by the end, they were in tears. Get your tissues ready. Here's the thought bubble. George Barnwell is an apprentice to Thorogood, a London merchant. He falls under the sway of Millwood, an evil prostitute. She invites him to dinner and then tells him that because of their dinner, she's being evicted. So George steals a bunch of money from his master to pay her rent. Because George is a good guy when he's not being led astray by evil prostitutes, he confesses and runs away. This makes Millwood grouchy. But then she remembers that George has a rich uncle, whom she convinces George to rob and murder. That must have been some dinner. George arrives in disguise and murders his uncle. With his dying words, the uncle asks forgiveness for both his nephew and his murderer. And George is like, "They're both me!" And with more dying words, the uncle is like, "It's okay." So George is too sad to rob him. When George shows up at Millwood's without the money, she has him arrested. But then her servants have her arrested, and they're both sentenced to death. Millwood doesn't repent because evil, but George does, and he goes to his death peacefully. Then his friends come out to remind everyone to learn from George's mistakes. The play upholds basic sentimental beliefs. People are mostly good, but can be led astray by evil influences. We should learn from the moral errors of others. Don't rob or kill people, especially rich people. Which probably explains why, for almost a century, London apprentices were sent by their bosses to see this play every year. You know, just like as a friendly reminder. Thanks, Thought Bubble. Sentimental comedies and bourgeois tragedies weren't the only kinds of theater on offer in early modern England. Remember how every so often governments decide that theater is dangerous and needs a lot of regulating? Well, this is one of those times. In the 1730s, regulation of the theaters was divided up haphazardly among the Lord Chamberlain, the Treasury, and the occasional judge, which means it wasn't being regulated much at all. There were a bunch of political satires mocking Parliament and the King, most of them written by Henry Fielding. In response, some ministers were like, hey, remember when the Master of Revels could just censor stuff? Let's bring that back. Robert Walpole convinced them to pass the Licensing Act of 1737 by taking one of the most offensive plays, The Golden Rump, and reading it aloud in Parliament. Worth noting, though, that no manuscripts of The Golden Rump exist, and it doesn't appear to have ever been performed in public. How so?
And the Licensing Act of 1737 also needs to be taken care of because therein the playwrights became responsible. They could be legally treasoned if the government feels that something is offensive.
Suspicious. One theory is that Walpole commissioned it himself for political purposes. So tricky. So effective. The Licensing Act said that only 2 London theatres, Drury Lane and Covent Garden, could present spoken drama, though Parliament later gave license for the summer months to Samuel Foote at the Haymarket as repayment for a prank the Duke of York pulled, betting that Foote couldn't ride an unrideable horse. It turns out he couldn't, and then they had to amputate his leg. The Licensing Act also said that no plays could be performed for gain, hire, or reward without the prior approval of the government. Of course, a lot of theaters got around this. They'd charge for a concert, or a beer, or an auction, and then accidentally stage a play. Whoops! But sometimes theaters were caught, and many of them closed. The closure of the New Wells Theatre led its proprietor, William Hallam, to send a troupe of players to America, and as we'll see, that helped get American theater going. Another workaround was to avoid presenting spoken dramas by dancing them, miming them, or using puppets. A rule known as the Burletta Rule said that a drama wasn't spoken as long as there were 5 pieces of incidental music in it. So suddenly there was a lot of musical theater. A version of Commedia dell'arte also appeared in this period, now called pantomime. Acting also underwent some changes in the 18th century. The main style of the period was declamatory. Actors faced front and loudly orated, even when the characters were supposed to be talking to each other. But just as bourgeois tragedy was taking baby steps towards realism, acting likewise inched towards the lifelike. The trend started with the Scottish actor Charles Macklin, but its biggest proponent was David Garrick, the most famous and versatile actor of his day. Like other actors, Garrick delivered his speeches facing front, but he departed from the sing-song style of verse speaking and tried to make his lines sound natural and conversational. One of his techniques was to make his characters stammer in moments of great emotion. It's natural, right? At the time, actors would only rehearse a new play 3 hours per day for 2 weeks, but Garrick extended that rehearsal period and asked the other actors to actually act during rehearsals instead of just marking cues and blocking. Man, what an actual acting taskmaster. Theaters had become very big, swelling to accommodate more than 3,000 spectators, because if you're one of 2 licensed theaters in the city, you're going to pack them in. By the later half of the 18th century, they had big, elaborate scenery to match, too. The whole situation became even more theatrical when Garrick kicked the audience off the stage. Scenic innovations were becoming more realistic as well. While sets used to be generic, every theater would have a go-to temple or go-to palace or garden, some theater managers started to insist on specific settings for each production and hired scene painters to realize them. Today, sentimental comedy and bourgeois tragedy don't seem especially realistic, and 18th century acting would strike us as ridiculous. But these were some of the first actors trying to close the gap between drama and real life, so to speak. And some of the first serious plays to focus on middle-class characters, insisting that real conflicts and emotions don't belong to the nobility alone. And that was a big deal. As the 18th century became the 19th, theatrical changes abound. Next time, storm clouds on the horizon, stormy weather, and a storm front a-comin'. We'll head to Germany for the first time since we discussed the morality plays, and we'll check in on Sturm, Drang, and Romanticism. Things aren't looking so moral this time. But until then, curtain. Crash.
All right, hopefully that would have given you a more elaborate idea about how sentimental theater took its roots in England. The act of 1737 was indeed a serious one as far as liberty of writers are concerned, and that was often asked. Okay, that was often used to penalize most of the playwrights. And just in case you don't know what is the immediate response to the Act of 1737, it forced a playwright who had written a couple of plays perhaps by then, who was two plays old. It forced that playwright to drop playwriting at once and resort to what may be called novel writing. And now, when we look back, we regard him as one of the three wheels of modern novel that rised in that period. The rise of the novel. When you speak about the rise of the novel, he's one among the three wheels as defined by the critics, and his name is nothing else but Henry Fielding. He resorted to write Tom Jones and Shamila and so on by shunning uh, drama or playwriting because of the Act of 1737, which is to be taken care of. It's a point to be noted. Okay, so moving on from that, the next, as you know, you could see this up and low shifts. So there was comedy of manners, which you can call as high comedy. Then you have sentimental drama with a lot of emotions, like soap operas or serials. Yeah, so there is sentimental comedy, and then all of a sudden, people were fed up with sentimental drama too. They wear masks, so they were puppet shows. That's there. Also, the theater restrictions came into force. 1737 Act was major influence. But by the year, say by the time we reach the latter half of the 19th century, something happened called the restoration of comedy of manners. And when I say the restoration of comedy of manners, it simply means the genre of ridiculing the manners, the high class manners of a hypocritical society came back into fore. And when this high class manners were ridiculed, the focus was immensely given by the playwright to not have anything that was accused by Jeremy Collier in 1698. That is, profanity and obscenity was done away with in refining high class comedy. So when you speak about restoration comedy of manners, I mean the restoration of comedy of manners. I'm sorry. When you speak about the restoration of comedy of manners, it was a refined one in terms of its language, adult content, and so on. It was more of a pure comedy, and one of the classic examples being the importance of being earnest, written by Oscar Wilde. Just a second. Hello, Anushara. Welcome back. It so happened that while you tried to log in a little while ago, I was trying to type a lot of text names into the chat box, and somehow unknowingly, every time while I was typing, your permission was not granted. I sincerely apologize for that. And welcome back. Okay, so speaking about Oscar Wilde was a homosexual. He was arrested and put into jail. Back then, homosexuality was considered to be a crime. But then, his major, most noted work being the importance of being earnest, and that absolutely perfect, purified form of comedy. So if you want to have a look at that, you may go back and Google it and watch the play. The play is available in YouTube. If you want to look at some instances of Ernest, it's a pun on the name Ernest, the quality Ernest, and the name Ernest. In that sense, it's slightly allegorical. So every girl deserves someone who's earnest. And in the play, we have two characters, bunburying. It's another term that you may need to check. Bunburyism. Okay, I'm not explaining it. You may go Google and figure out what it is later. So, Bunburyism is another term that Oscar Wilde has given to the critical theatre world. So, there are two heroes who go Bunburying, they have swapped names, and there is utter chaos and confusion regarding who is actually Ernest. And I think there is a movie made on this as well. I don't remember the name of the movie, in which Mohanlal plays one of the characters. So there is this uncle who comes back and who holds the fortunes of Mohanlal. But without knowing It is the uncle Mohanlal abuses that person who's somewhere else without giving him his wealth. But at the same time, he treasures a photograph of his uncle, which the uncle feels so touched by and decides to help Mohanlal. I don't remember the name of the movie, but nonetheless, the play, in fact, follows a plot on similar lines. So you may go through the importance of being earnest if you feel like. I'm going to share one more video with you before we move on to Pygmalion. This is because you must have a proper understanding of another group called Irish theatre. Just in case you haven't realized this after having written your assignments, you must observe the fact that your paper is titled British Drama. MEG2 is titled British Drama, but you have playwrights like George Bernard Shaw, J.M. Singh, and Samuel Beckett, who are primarily Irish playwrights. So Ireland is an ally state near England, just like Scotland. Often there have been discussions about annexing it to Britain and all, but nonetheless, they are an independent nation nonetheless, or an island nonetheless. So Irish theatre, its bloom and expansion becomes significant with these three names. And I'd like to share a video with you because it will give you a much broader idea of this. And then we'll come back and very quickly discuss Pygmalion. Here we go.
Hey there, I'm Mike Rignetta. This is Crash Course Theater, and today we'll be discussing Irish drama. Nope, not for it. There are going to be no leprechaun jokes, no Lucky Charms, no faith in Begora, because the culture that produced the most linguistically expressive and inventive canon of modern drama does not deserve dumb jokes. It deserves smart ones. We're going to try. York is probably going to come back later with a shillelagh. We're going to look at the founding of the Abbey Theatre and the work of J.M. Singh, the first legit literary star that the Abbey produced. Then
Please note that the spelling is Synge, though he's pronounced as Singh. And it has nothing to do with the Punjabi Singhs.
we're going to head to England, where a couple expats shook up bourgeois drama with some very funny plays. Let's crack on. Okay, sorry, that's the last one. In the late 19th century, Ireland experienced an Irish Renaissance. It was different from the English Renaissance in that it was Irish, came later, had less plague, and was an explicit reaction against England, which had colonized Ireland since the 16th century. The Irish Renaissance was largely a literary one, celebrating Irish history, folklore, and the Gaelic language. Eventually, a couple of its adherents, the poets W.B. Yeats and Edward Martyn, and the writer and folklorist Lady Augusta Gregory, thought that it was time to bring upon the stage the deeper thoughts and emotions of Ireland. They founded the Irish Literary Theatre, which eventually merged with another theatre to form the Irish National Theatre Society, first performing in Molesworth Hall. In 1904, they took over a mechanic's home on Lower Abbey Street and acquired an actual physical stage, the Abbey Theatre. Its opening performance was a short symbolist play by W.B. Yeats on Ballia's Strand, along with Lady Gregory's Spreading the News, a gentle comedy about how a piece of gossip travels through a community. This theater is still going, by the way, albeit in a different location. Yeats was a great poet. Lady Gregory, a fine folklorist and champion of Irish literature and culture. She basically invented the Irish folk drama, but neither of them was a great playwright. The Abbey's first great playwright, whose play The Shadow of the Glen debuted on the theater's second night, was John Millington Synge. Synge was born into an upper-middle-class Protestant family. After college and music school, he moved to Paris to study literature and met Yeats. Yeats was like, leave. If you really want to be a writer, you should go to the remote islands, which are really great if you like whiskey and knitwear and drowning. And there, Yeats told him that you should express a life that has never found action. Synge was like, challenge accepted, pal. For several summers, he studied the people and the customs of the islands, and especially the language, a dialect that's rich, musical, and eloquent. This language really cracked open his writing. As he wrote in a preface to his later play, The Playboy of the Western World, In a good play, every speech should be as fully flavored as a nut or apple, and such
Mind you, that play is also prescribed for your study in the paper MEG2. Just continuing with the play, there is some technical issue on my side. Just give me a second. All right, here we go.
speeches cannot be written by anyone who works among people who have shut their lips on poetry. In Ireland, for a few years more, we have a popular imagination that is fiery and magnificent and tender, so that those of us who wish to write start with a chance that is not given to writers in places where the springtime of the local life has been forgotten. Between 1902 and 1909, Synge wrote 6 plays, 5 of them set in contemporary Ireland. Like Chekhov, he died young at the age of 38. At first glance, his plays seem romantic, concerned with forbidding landscapes and the noble rural people who inhabit them. But Synge was no romantic. He was an unsentimental realist whose work was tinged with myth because the rural people that he encountered lived with myth in their daily lives. His work is naturalistic too, but like the later plays of Ibsen and Chekhov, it pushes towards the symbolic, mixing comedy, tragedy, and satire, forming a heightened realism that borders on magical. Synge was controversial in his day, not so much among the elites of the Irish Renaissance as with audiences, who decided that his dramas were an insult to Irish nationalism, and especially Irish womanhood. When the Abbey staged Playboy of the Western World, about a man who claims to have killed his father, crowds tried to shout down the play every night, and the police were called. The crowd was especially upset by the use of the word shift, meaning a woman's slip or undergarment, which either means that underwear is really scandalous or that audiences had already come prepared to hate a play that didn't square with their ideas of Irish nobility. Or both. Let's take a look at one of Synge's less controversial plays, and one of the greatest one-acts ever written, Riders to the Sea, which was first performed in 1904 and revived at the Abbey in 1906. Help us out, Thought Bubble. In a fisherman's cottage on the Aran Islands, Kathleen is baking bread when her sister Nora comes in with a bunch of clothes pulled off a drowned man. Is the drowned man their brother Michael? The clothes will tell. The sisters have already lost 4 brothers and their father to drowning, so this would be bad. Their mother, Mara, comes in worrying about her youngest son Bartley's plans to sail to a horse fair in Connemara. Bartley enters and asks for his mother's blessing, but she won't give it. If it was 100 horses or 1,000 horses you had itself, what is the price of 1,000 horses against a son where there is one son only, she tells him. Bartley leaves anyway, riding a red mare and leading a gray pony, and his sisters tell their mother to go after him, give him her blessing and a bit of bread. She does, and while she's gone, the sisters discover that the clothes are Michael's. Mara returns and says that she couldn't catch Bartley because she had a terrible vision. She saw Bartley riding the red mare, and riding beside him was dead Michael. Soon after, some villagers bring in Bartley's body. The gray pony knocked him into the sea, where he drowned because this family cannot catch a damn break. Mara has no more sons, but she accepts her fate, saying, "They're all gone now, and there isn't anything more the sea can do to me. I'll have no call now to be up crying and praying when the wind breaks from the south, and you can hear the surf is in the east, and the surf is in the west, making a great stir with the 2 noises. And they, hitting one on the other, I won't care what way the sea is when the other women will be keening." Thank you, Thought Bubble. That was fatalistic. You can see Synge's attention to realistic detail with the bread cooking in the cottage stove, and you can hear it in the dialect. He was so concerned that the setting be realistic that he imported Aran fabrics and tried to make sure the set gave off the correct smells. But there's more than realism here, too. The play has links to Greek tragedy and also to Celtic mythology, especially to the malevolent spirit called the Puka, who often appears as a horse. For Synge, the natural and the supernatural were linked among the rural Irish. As Yeats wrote after Synge's death, he loves all that has edge, all that is salt in the mouth, all that is rough to the hand, all that heightens the emotions by contest, all that stings into life the sense of tragedy. But Irish writers weren't only reinventing theater in Ireland, they were reimagining theater in England too, because English theater came to modernism a lot more slowly. Melodramas gave way to hand-wringing social problem plays that ultimately reinforced the bourgeois order and really weren't that different from domestic melodramas. I mean, if you're going to promote a conservative moral order, at least have everyone die in an avalanche, right? But along came two Irishmen to rehabilitate English drama, and they did it with wit. And to wit, Oscar Fingal O'Flaherty Wills Wilde, aka Oscar Wilde. When he was at university, he told a friend, "I'll be a poet, a writer, a dramatist. Somehow or other I'll be famous, and if not famous, notorious." And he was right. Totally right. After writing the tragedy Vera and then the censored symbolist drama Salome, Wilde had his first theatrical hit, Lady Windermere's Fan, in 1892. About a seemingly unfaithful husband, it looks like a social problem play. It seems to resolve conventionally the way that social comedies and problem plays are supposed to. Nice and comfortable. Bourgeois people out of trouble. But Wilde spends most of the play making fun of society and undercutting the whole idea of conventional morals. The play demonstrates his belief that, quote, "we should treat all the trivial things of life seriously and all the serious things of life with sincere and studied triviality." His most brilliant and subversive work is the 1895 play The Importance of Being Earnest, one of the great stage comedies. It's a sparkling whirl of disguise, coincidence, and mistaken identity. And there's a bit about muffins that you might say I am particularly fond of. But amidst all the snack food jokery, Ernest is also earnestly undermining comfortable, conventional beliefs about love, marriage, family, and hard work. It argues that the truth, the thing that's usually at the core of any problem play, is actually overrated and unstable. The same year that Ernest premiered, Wilde was put on trial for gross indecency, which at the time was a euphemism for being gay. He served 2 years hard labor and died penniless a few years later of meningitis. In De Profundis, his final work, he wrote, "I took the drama, the most objective form known to art, and made it as personal a mode of expression as the lyric or the sonnet." And George Bernard Shaw did that too. A brilliant critic and political philosopher, his plays are both brainy comedies and articulations of his particular and sometimes weird beliefs about men, women, evolution, and civil society. Shaw was a huge fan of Ibsen, paying tribute to him in The Quintessence of Ibsenism. Like Ibsen, he believed that the theater could help audiences see through the fictions of conventional morality and into life as it really is. He used humor as a social critique in plays that are spikier and more pointed than Wilde's. His works, Pygmalion, Man and Superman, Major Barbara, and Mrs. Warren's Profession, include debates and dialectics, a dance of ideas. Some of these ideas are provocative, contrarian, and even dangerous. "What drama can do," he wrote, "is to take this unmeaning, haphazard show of life that means nothing to you and arrange it in such a way as to make you think very much more deeply about it than you ever dreamed. That is drama, and that is a very important public service to render." Thanks for watching. Next time we're going to take a look at symbolism, surrealism, and also Dadaism, a theatrical form that makes literally no sense on purpose. But until then, flapjack, carburetor, culottes,
All right, so I hope that gives you an overview to the rise of Irish theatre, the roles played by J.M. Singh, and in particular George Bernard Shaw. Another key term that I'd like you to be familiar with at some point of time is problem plays. It's not pertaining to Shaw alone; it also is equally perfected by a person like Henrik Ibsen, A Doll's House, and also The Ghosts, for instance. So you may go back and check the word in Google and get to know what they are. So quickly, we are moving on to Pygmalion, which is our discussion today. And as usual, we'll take a couple of minutes break to deal with your attendance sheet. And before we venture out to do that, we have a couple of minutes. So I'll share my screen and I'll show to you the assignment questions which you're already familiar with. We never dealt directly with the assignment questions this year. So I'd quickly take you there and I'd tell you why Pygmalion's discussion is slightly different from the other questions out there. So, speaking about your assignment questions this year, maybe because you are all amidst the pandemic, the question paper setter has left you quite free. Almost all the questions are direct, and there is nothing much for you to discuss. For example, you go Google play within a play in a Midsummer Night's Dream, you will get the play or the story, the content of the play. Or Hamlet soliloquies. There will be plenty of sites giving you a summary of seven soliloquies of Hamlet. The Alchemist as an allegory is one of the simplest questions that you can get from an otherwise confusing play. And comic strategies in the Playboy, or Murder in the Cathedral as a poetic drama, or the title of Look Back in Anger, referring to what may be called the Angry Young Men movement, or Waiting for Godot as a theater of the absurd. All this are, in simple terms, calling a spade a spade. I know you. I hope you know what it is. Again, just for a comic relief, when I was a student way back in 2008-11, an undergraduate learner, my second language was Malayalam. So for second language, we had a 2-mark question, and the question was like this in double quotes: "Alari Katalan," unquote. The question is "Alariyadare." Yeah, roared the savage, and the question is who roared, and it's like calling a spade. And mind you that Katalan did not have any name, so all that we could write is Katalan and we would easily get 2 marks. So similarly, the questions are quite direct and straightforward out here, and if at all you may feel like a question is different, that would be question number 5, which says, can Eliza and Pygmalion be termed as feminist? Elaborate. But again, even though it allows scope for discussion, it does not go deep into feminist literary theory or anything. It's purely stereotypical, and across the ages, this has been discussed. If at all you had Googled that question while writing your assignment, you would have come to know that this has been doing the rounds for a long time since the play was written. So, nonetheless, the play is also known for the colloquialisms, especially how also about class struggle, how Professor Higgins tries to make Eliza uh, sort of a purified elitist speaker, and how far does he fail or succeed is all the play is about. So we'll take a couple of minutes break. In the meanwhile, I'm sharing the link with you. You may fill that sheet, and when we come back, we'll address the question on feminism in relation to Pygmalion. The other questions, you can refer to the blog or the other materials in Google, and feel free to understand what Pygmalion is all about, because we are cramped by time. Nonetheless, the link is there. A couple of minutes, and I'll be back with the discussion. While you fill in the particulars, please make sure that you're not overwriting anybody's particulars. It seems there are still quite a few who haven't registered. Please make sure you write your names and ensure your name is not overwritten by someone. All right, let's get back to our discussion. Just in case you're still typing, you may continue to do that. Please lend me your ears. Besides that, all right. So before we get started, I'm sharing a couple of links with you, and these links would be helpful to you. Please don't ask me to mail them again. Please make sure you archive those links somewhere right now. Please don't ask me to mail that again because I have a lot of other works to deal with after this as well. So I'm sharing the link of the play, the entire play, Pygmalion, with you. And the second link is the downloadable link of Cliff Note version of Pygmalion. You may go to these two links later after my class is over. Okay, you need not download that right now. You may do that later. Um, right, just a second. Okay, so these two links may be of some help to you while you prepare for your exams. Apart from your study material or blocks, these are two things that you may go back to for a further detailed analysis and perspectives. All right, so now let me get started with Pygmalion. Speaking about Pygmalion, the question in assignment is about, is she a feminist? Of course, as I told you, this has been a long going debate, and most of us would agree or will have to agree that Eliza Doolittle is indeed a feminist. And we have reasons to say so because, on varied grounds, we can observe and we can state that Eliza Doolittle is a feminist because throughout the play we see male dominance. I think there is again some technical issue from my side. Are you able to listen to me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, my screen is hanging a little bit, so maybe that's a technical issue. No problem. So throughout the play, we can see that there is this male domination, which is existent, and I'm sorry. Mm, why is this getting hanged? Updation while I'm bringing on.
Sir, please proceed, sir. It is okay.
Yeah, yeah. No, no. Here, my system is getting hanged. I know maybe you're still able to listen to me, but then my system is getting hanged in between. Just give me a second. All right. I'm trying to share that. Okay, I've shared that link with you. Okay, fine. So we can see that there are male characters trying to dominate Eliza right from the beginning, and especially Professor Higgins tries to groom her to his tunes, to dance to his tunes, but then she tries to liberate herself by making a choice on her own. She decides to marry Freddie instead of Higgins, and thereby gains freedom from Professor Higgins. And her decision to break up from Higgins is mostly based on her choice of refusing to be objectified, and her decision to marry for love and not money and power shows that she is a strong supporter of the cause of feminism. And maybe towards the end, she is able to live according to her own choices and decisions and gains freedom and independence from Higgins. But again, the end can still be problematized because we have to see that She has to choose another guy, and her life continues to be surrounded by one man or the other. And in that sense, you can say that it doesn't really have a feminist ending. So it gives you a lot of scope for debate and discussions, but nonetheless, we are sticking on to um, the basics. Let's get started, just in case you don't know the summary by now, just in case you haven't read the play. As I told you, it's already one of his most popular plays, others being Saint Joanne and Man and Superman. And um, in the story, Professor Higgins and Colonel Pickering meet in the portico of St. Paul's Church after an opera. And Professor Higgins and Pickering, uh, who is a scientist of phonetics, and another one is a linguist of Indian dialectics. So at the beginning, they made a bet that Professor Higgins will transform Eliza, who is a flower girl, into a woman who's as well spoken as a duchess. So this is the premise from which the play begins. So two friends meet, they have a bet, and the bet is that Professor Higgins claims that he can make a flower girl speak like a duchess, a flourished language, that is. And later, Eliza received his invention to transform herself in order that she may work in a flower shop when she speaks properly enough. And some months later, Higgins trains Eliza to speak properly and behaves well. Teaches her to behave well. And there is the ambassadors' party that Higgins and Pickering made their bet, and Eliza makes a spectacular and resounding success. Actually, the bet for Higgins is definitely won, but he and Pickering are bored with the project all the time, which hurts Eliza, and she does not know what is to become of her. And at last, as we know, she chooses to leave and become herself. And uh, we see that there is this transformation of Eliza from being someone monitored and tailored by Higgins to a person who's self made, following her heart rather than the material fancies. So, speaking about the feminist aspects in the play, as the play begins, we know that she is extremely unique, and in the hierarchical society, uh, to a certain extent back then, the person's pronunciation distinctly used to reflect his or her social status. So this is one of the major things that Shaw is also trying to ridicule. So what if a flower girl gets to speak like a duchess? So Elisa is just a poor girl, a flower seller, who speak Cockney English. And like you'd have seen that video, the use of colloquialism was common to this what is called as new theater. And the colloquial slang was brought in. So Cockney dialect is what Shaw makes the flower girl speak. That is a local dialect. It's like a, in that sense, hierarchically not an appealing one. So he makes her speak in the Cockney dialect, and even though he speaks a Cockney dialect, she possesses self-respect and dare to pursue her own happiness. And by chance, she meets Higgins, who is a professor of phonetics, and she is given an opportunity to improve her pronunciation in order to get a better job. Even though we know that it is because he has had a bet with Colonel Pickering. And she is fascinated initially by this offer because a better language, a better accent would mean she could switch to a much more higher job. Just a second. Yeah, okay. So that also means that she can switch to a better job. And after persistent training by Higgins and sustained practices, she realizes a gorgeous transformation eventually. And yes, somebody is trying to say something. No. Okay. So by the time she realizes the truth, she decides to move on with Freddie, and She thereby, by doing that, she makes herself independent, someone who has self-respect, seeking freedom and equality. And while discussing these aspects of Eliza Doolittle, we must also remember a set of adjectives that comes to our mind. This would make it easier for you to understand the play. Just give me a second, let me just have some water. All right, I'm sorry. So when you think about these characters, there are certain adjectives that you should be aware of. The moment we say Eliza Doolittle, we get to list adjectives like poor, uneducated, confident, keen, independent, and somewhere towards the fag end, tough. So you can compare these adjectives to the quest of making her a feminist. Meanwhile, when we speak about Professor Higgins, he is ambitious, but he is rude and at once impatient. And these attributes goes to the making of the entire conflict that we may come across in the play. And speaking about the transformation of Eliza Doolittle, uh, we see that Eliza undergoes three different role transformations. Initially, she is a flower girl, then she is a lady in good manners, and by the time we reach the end of the play, she is an independent woman with self respect. Yes, I would definitely problematize the independent woman tag by saying that she's again going to a guy, though of love and of her choice. But then this is the three transformations that happens in the play with Eliza Doolittle. So as you analyze whether she is a feminist, these three stages must be kept in mind. Initially, she is a flower girl, then she um, becomes a lady in good manners in terms of flourished tongue, becoming with the training of Professor Higgins. Sorry, yeah, with the training of Professor Higgins, and also last but not the least, an independent woman by her choice, choosing her self-respect. And sorry, and the transformation from a flower girl to a lady, we must remember, is only the transformation in accent, dressing, and manners. While the transformation from a lady to an independent woman lies in the evocation of Elisa's self awareness. So we must be aware of these two distinctions, from a flower girl to a lady in good manners, and a flower girl to a lady with self respect. So we would see that one is more about outward appearances, the other is more of a self conscious choice. And yeah, and even though she is a poor girl when the play begins, and as the play moves, we see that she becomes someone who is a seeker of independence, especially self independence, freedom, and equality. And she tries her best to find a way transforming herself from the poor to the decent. And afterwards, with the help of Professor Higgins, she becomes a lady in good manners, but she loses herself. And that's when the awakening part happens, and she realizes that she is just a pawn, PAWN, between Pickering and Higgins, and she makes a decision to leave Higgins, which transforms her from a conventional lady to an independent woman with self awareness or self esteem. And uh, speaking about feminism in the play, we should realize that. Again, the points may be the same, but then at the beginning, she is a poor flower seller. She's poorly dressed and she's seen speaking a terrible English. An experiment then is being conducted on her. She has an opportunity to speak the language with a better accent, and she gets transformed in the process. And she passes somewhat for a duchess, and her triumph comes with her awakening. The two gentlemen who started the experiment regardless of her feelings but then she has been, despite being made a scapegoat, she asks herself what is to become of her. And the underlying theme is a strong feminine awareness. She rises to a strong realization that what matters is self respect and self realization rather than falling prey to someone's bet or fortunes. And we can see that it is resonant to a lot of modern females' story as well. Apart from that, we must also discuss about the prefaces that Shaw had for his works. He did not write preface to all his plays. You must remember that from a certain point onwards, whether it's a novel or a play, I'm sorry, yeah, whether it's a novel or a play, these prefaces written by the authors served as a pointer towards why or what is the purpose behind he or she is writing a play or a novel. You may come across the purpose of preface of Henry Fielding or Samuel Richardson in their novels in MEG 3. So similarly, there are plenty of playwrights, including Oscar Wilde, for instance, who used to write preface for their plays in order to let the reader be aware of their politics behind writing some plays. George Bernard Shaw, unlike other all these playwrights, what he did was he did not write preface to all his plays. He wrote preface only when and where he think or he thought a play was crucial. If he thought that a play was significant to him or he wanted to convey something by a preface, he used to write short prefaces. So one such play is Pygmalion. And in the link that I have shared with you, the link of the full play Pygmalion, you would get to read this preface as well, where George Bernard Shaw talks about what goes behind the play. I'm sorry. Okay. So he ultimately wrote a preface only when he felt that he considered them important. And sometimes the prefaces, the prologues, and the afterwards exceeded the length of the original dramas. So there were also plays where, I'm sorry, in an attempt to explain his agenda, he wrote prefaces which were much longer than the entire play itself. So the prefaces, prologues, and afterwards exceeded the length of the original plays. And in one of his prefaces, Shaw comments that most dramatists use the preface to expound on things that have little or no importance to the drama. Here, Shaw's preface does not comment upon the drama that is to follow, but instead, since the play deals with phonetics, and since the character of Higgins is based largely upon a man named Henry Sweet, on whom that role is being molded, and since Shaw ultimately did leave a large sum of money upon his death for a thorough revision of English spelling rules, he uses the preface to comment upon the absurdity of English spelling in connection with English pronunciation. So you can see an elegant discussion on the disparity between English spelling and English pronunciation. For example, you write something like CUT and pronounce it cut, and PUT becomes put instead of put, or the other way around. So he takes a large deal of discussions on this disparity between the spellings as well as the pronunciation. And finally, he sarcastically refers to those critics who say that a successful play should never be didactic. This play is obviously didactic, it has a purpose, and it has been immensely popular ever since it was first presented. And hence, the preface of Pygmalion is something that you need to read as and when you can as well. And I would also like to briefly discuss one more thing related to the preface. Just give me a second. Yeah, when you go to, for example, the arms and the man, unlike Pygmalion, or some of his important plays, there is no actual separate preface to that particular play. But however, there was a preface to the original volume of plays which contained a group of plays by Shaw. But then, as he noted elsewhere, a preface seldom or never concerns the play, which is to follow the preface. And he always held this point of view. And that's why he tried to get rid of prefaces as and where it could be avoided. So instead, he used preface to comment upon the new style of drama, which he calls as new drama. Later, we also have terms like problem plays to refer to that. But then there is something which he calls as new drama. So he uses the preface to define what new drama is, what are the differences that could be found in it, and the sort of function that is attached with new drama. So, yep. So, according to him, new dramas such as his or Ibsen's, he had high regard for Henrik Ibsen. So he says that what I call as new drama, which includes my plays as well as Henrik Ibsen's plays, are not written to be commercial successes, but to be intellectual vehicles which would make the audience consider or think about their life. Especially if you read, for example, A Doll's House by Ibsen, you would agree to it. The play makes the reader reflect about one's own life rather than a mesmerizing thing about a commercial success. So it makes you think, it problematizes your day-to-day life environment, thereby making you reflect on your lives. I'm sorry. Yeah, that makes you think and reflect on your life and arrive at observations regarding how your day-to-day life is faring. So this is one of the things that's crucial to Ibsenian and Shawian plays. So he calls that what is called a new drama. And just in case you want to have this definition, I may repeat the same once again. According to him, new drama is a name applied to dramas such as his or Ibsen's plays, which were not written to be commercial successes, but to be intellectual vehicles which would make the audience consider their, or think about their life, to be intellectually aware of their historical place in civilization. So, thus, he refuses to pander himself to popular demands for romantic and thus unbelievable and unrealistic situations. It's deeply rooted in another plane of realism. And ultimately, according to him, the theater should become a place for the airing of ideas and a place where sham and pretense can be exposed in a way that is delightful to the audience. So that's where Pygmalion is deeply rooted, for instance. The theater becomes a place for the airing of ideas and a place where pretense as in high class manners, flourished accent, the Duchess like tongue, these things are being ridiculed in the play. So if you ask me, is that a manners comedy? It's not in terms of the features, but technically he's ridiculing the high class accent aspects of the Victorian society or pre-Victorian society. And if you look at Pygmalion, that would give you a deep insight into how he goes into using colloquialism as well. For instance, just give me a second. Yep. For instance, um, short, for example, in a place while trying to make this colloquial accent of Eliza, he demonstrates the very difficult task of transforming her speech by having her speaking a very strong Cockney from the beginning of the play. In the beginning, we can see her complaining about the manners of a young man after he accidentally knocks a flower basket out of her hands, in which she goes on to say, "There's manosphere. Theo branches of violet strode into the mat. Oh, is as a one, well, faved Danya, the roti Brahms, a mother should eat now. Better to spoil a poor girl the flahen than run away at that pine. Will you pay me off them?" Will you pay me of them? This will you pay me of them is, would you pay me for what I have suffered? So the sort of Cockney dialect that she uses, Higgins finds it a very difficult task to transform her from her Cockney accent. And at a later stage, we see that Higgins' difficulty lies in the process of transformation when she begins learning English pronunciation and good manners. So, in this case, the translation shows this process by attempting, like Shaw, to represent the spoken deviation from the norm through written language. For example, Higgins says, Una tasa di the, stop, say, a cup of tea. And Lisa says, Una tasa di tea, una tasa di tea. And in one of her first society engagements at Mrs. Higgins' house, Elisa performs the part of the lady impeccably until she spoils Higgins' experiments. So there are plenty of hilarious scenes. So in one scene, it so happens that she somewhat does well, and at one particular point she ends up spoiling it. Again, I get reminded of a vernacular example from a Malayalam movie. I think it happens in the movie His Highness Abdullah, where Mamukaya, who is by birth a Muslim, is taken to to an elitist what do you call courtyard as a Brahmin, and the language that Mamukoya speaks becomes confusing. He says Manda. Manda is more of a Muslimized language, and I think it's in another movie. The same fellow says Guruvayurupupa. Yeah. So sometimes when we try to speak flourished tongue, we end up speaking what is natural to us. So the same can be seen with Eliza Doolittle in Pygmalion. So if you look at that particular scene, Pickering says, "Goodbye, Miss Doolittle." They shake hands, which is a perfect way of behavior, elitist behavior like a duchess. And Lisa, nodding to the others, says, "Goodbye, all." Meanwhile, Freddie, opening the door for her, asks, "Are you walking across the park, Miss Doolittle? If so?" And Lisa replies, "Walk? Not bloody likely." And this "not bloody likely" is a place where she loses the plot. And this "not bloody likely" is too much of Lisa's original sense. It is colloquial, it is not grammatical, it is not flourished, and hence it does not fall into the high class requisites of Eliza Doolittle. And this "not bloody" thing is something that spoils the entire plot. And you may most often have this "not bloody likely" for your annotation, or you may also have that first scene where she speaks with that man in the colloquial accent. And just in case you didn't get what I said, it could simply be translated into, "These manners of yours, don't you feel ashamed, or are you mad? What kind of act have you done? What have you done? You have spoiled all that I had, and the flowers are all on the floor. Would you pay me for all of them?" Is what she asks. But the way colloquialism is brought in by Bernard Shaw uh, makes us take a look at the Cockney dialect a bit more critically. And because such dialects are considered to be inferior, Bernard Shaw problematizes our elitist thought of or our prejudice towards the so-called standard English or approved dialect and so on. And I believe that he is able to have such stand also because he is an he's an Irishman. And speaking about Shaw, I would also like to give a couple of digressive stories about George Bernard Shaw so that you would get to know a flavor of him. George Bernard Shaw is someone who used to problematize literally anything and everything. And perhaps until him, nobody really dared to question the canon. Even though Samuel Johnson slightly attempted to critically look at William Shakespeare, he still ended up praising Shakespeare. But it was George Bernard Shaw who consistently kept questioning the legacy and the uniqueness of Shakespeare. In a popular Shakespearean consortium, there were so many speakers. I think it was on, I don't remember what the occasion was, but on a popular Shakespearean Sadas or of audience. There were critics who were fond of Shakespeare, who admired Shakespeare, who graced the dais and spoke highly of Shakespeare. So one after the other, everybody were appreciating and applauding Shakespeare. Then a tall man comes to the stage with a huge, large beard, and he comes to the stage. He utters two dialogues, and the stage falls into huge silence. What does he say? The tall man with the beard comes in front of the mic. First dialogue: I am taller than Shakespeare. Then the audience goes blank. How dare you? Nobody has said that before. Somebody comes to the stage and claims that he's taller than Shakespeare. The second statement was an epic statement. He says, I am taller than Shakespeare because I sit on his shoulders. It has been interpreted in various ways by critics. There are people who say that Bernard Shaw claimed that he considers himself to be much of a genius than Shakespeare, and there are people who later, taking T.S. Eliot's theory of historical sense, claims that what Shaw meant was he follows the legacy set by the bard. But then he has ridiculed Shakespeare in most of the plays. Another instance that I can give you is um, there is this coinage called Sweet 16 by William Shakespeare. I don't know why translation does this, but in Malayalam, we often call it Madhura Padanelu. Okay. So I think in Pygmalion it is. Colonel Pickering is seen to eat a cake or something. No, is involved in a conversation. And he speaks about some girl and he says, she is in Sweet 16. And the other character responds by asking him, did you eat her? So he tries to problematize it in realistic manner, saying sweet is an adjective that you use when you eat something. So how do you call someone's age to be sweet? So he problematizes this stereotypical notions held by people from Shakespearean times. So we can see that with most of his plays. So he's not someone who is reluctant to challenge the then existing norms and standards and everything. So even in the case of the character building of Lisa or Elizabeth, for that sake, Elizabeth Doolittle, he has tried to problematize these things. Though the ending of the play has also often come into critical uh, attacks. There are people who say that it's a happy ending, it's a romantic ending, and George Bernard Shaw has disagreed with that. He says that that's not so. But despite his disagreement, people have regarded the ending to be a happy ending, wherein Eliza gets to live with a man of his choice. That's Freddie. But again, when we discuss it from a feminist point of view, we have to look back and wonder whether it is actually a proper befitting ending, because she is surrounded by men. It's men who shape her destiny. It's men who dictate where and what and how she should tread for, and until up till the fag end. Even when the play ends, we see that her life, her future rests at the hand of a man who is, in this case, coincidentally, Freddie. Even though he is a man she loves, after all, he is a man. And mm, yep. All right. So I think that somewhat. Um, I think I have covered almost all the points that I want to discuss with you. Maybe a little bit of feminism here and there. Let me just have a look at it. Yeah, very quickly, a couple of references that I missed out. Yeah, the plot of the play, without doubt, is the creation of women, either the creation of a duchess from a flower girl or the creation of a woman from a duchess, in which man is God, the Father, and the Creator, whereas woman is in the position of a child being corrected and remade by man. And from the very beginning of the play, we can see the unequal relationship between man and women. And yeah, man and women, and man is superior and woman is inferior. In Act 1, when the two protagonists first appear, we can easily find the difference. The male character, the language professor, is an upper class gentleman, and uh, the flower girl is only a creature, as he terms her, with visible and distinguishing marks of lower class society. And what is more, through the language professor, Shaw expresses his own value of morality, and through the lessons Higgins teaches, he intends to teach with his own brand of didacticism. And one of these is found in Higgins' first speech to whining Eliza. These are certain dialogues I had compiled to discuss with you. So, in the initial half, when Higgins tries to teach Eliza good manners, he tells her that a woman who utters depressing and disgusting sounds has no right to be anywhere, no right to live. So now look that the language is comprehensible to you because it's Higgins speaking. The moment Eliza replies, it's not comprehensible to you. So Higgins says that a woman who utters depressing and disgusting sounds has no right to be anywhere, no right to live. Remember that you are a human being with a soul and a divine gift of articulate speech. That your native language is the language of Shakespeare and Milton and the Bible, and don't sit there crooning like a bilious pigeon. So, this is a line that you may have for your annotation, at least the last part. Remember that you are a human being with a soul and a divine gift of articulate speech, that your native language is the language of Shakespeare and Milton and the Bible, and don't sit there crooning like a pigeon. So, thus, from this insulting speech, we get to realize that the social reformation is based upon the phonetic reformation of women, despite the fact that language professor himself always speaks brutal and nasty language all through the play. And the plot is also concerned with the growing up. So often, Higgins treats Eliza as a child, and under his guidance, she not only learns phonetics and manners, but also learns to find out her own spark of divine fire. So the play is not only the creation of women for man's preference, but also the creation of a soul for man's admiration and respect. So the Pygmalion in this play is a life giver as well as a soul giver. And we are led to see that she evolves from confusion, ignorance, and illusion to coherence, knowledge, and reality under the help and guidance of the male professor, that is Higgins. And he is described initially as the greatest teacher in the world, capable not only of educating the flower girl to be a duchess, but giving the duchess a freedom and an emotional independence greater even than he himself possesses. And what is more interesting and ridiculous is that the purpose for this creation is to make the woman a satisfied wife for man, especially for the upper class man, such as, say, for example, the Lieutenant of Ireland or Governor General or somebody who wants a deputy queen. And with the creation of women as its theme, the figure is certainly pre-patterned by Shaw, and the woman character and the position of women in society at that point of time is no doubt the lowest, and the character is seen only as an object for experiment. And as Higgins speaks about her, he uses derogatory language. He describes Eliza as a creature, a baggage, one of the squashed cabbage leaves of covered garden, a damned impudent slut, and so on. She is everything but an equal human being to man. So Higgins even ignores her gender. In Act 2, when she comes for elocution lessons, and Higgins orders his housemaid to take all her clothes off, everyone in the play and out of the play suspects whether his intention is sexual or intellectual. As a matter of even worse fact, he doesn't even take her as a human being at all. And we can see that such a treatment continues. And His attitude to her is often very rude and abusive. He orders her uh, to sit down, and when she does not do so immediately, he repeats the order, thundering it at her. He shouts at her, and when she interprets his speculations about the price she has offered for the lesson, he barks out saying, "Hold your tongue." And when, as a consequence of those speculations, she begins to cry, he threatens her, saying, "Somebody is going to touch you with a broomstick if you don't stop sniveling." So look at the sort of abuse that she suffers under him. And again, in Act 5, when the men cannot find Eliza and set the police to look for her, Mrs. Higgins says, "What right have you to go to the police and give the girl's name as if she were a thief or a lost umbrella or something?" But unfortunately, that's just the position of women in the male dominant society. She's nobody but something, especially when she comes from the bottom of the society. And the two main characters are described as sharp contrast to each other. The man is learned and the woman is ignorant. The man is intelligent and the woman is stupid. The man is reasonable and the woman is emotional, and so on and on and on. But after reading the play, uh, we can simply observe that the male protagonist is a misogynist, and the way he treats Eliza is quite condemnable. Again, if you go back to Act 2, where he has this conversation with Pickering, there is this conversation where Pickering says, "Excuse the straight question, Higgins. Are you a man of good character where women are concerned?" And Higgins replies, "Have you ever met a man of good character where women are concerned?" So indirectly, he states that women drive men into wrong ways or into poor sexuality. And Picking agrees to that. He says, "Yes, yes." And Higgins says that, "I find that the moment I let women make friends with me, she becomes jealous, exacting, suspicious, and a damn nuisance. I find that the moment I let myself make friends with a woman, I become selfish and tyrannical. Women upset everything. When you let them into your life, you find that the woman is driving at one thing and you drive at another." Again, another two lines that would be asked for annotation. Women upset everything. When you let them into your life, you find that the woman is driving at one thing and you drive at another. So we can see plenty of such occasions of misogyny in the play. And that also should add to your answers, just in case you still have not written your assignment. That can also go into your answers. And um, I have in fact marked a few lines for you because you asked for a few annotation lines, and I'm trying to go through that quickly and give my comments on that. In Act 4, for instance, she accuses her father because she is fed up. She says, "You don't care. I know you don't care. You wouldn't care if I was dead. I'm nothing to you. No so much as them slippers." And we can see that um, she feels that being a woman in that society, a low class woman in that society, her stature is not even equivalent to the slippers, even in her family. And in Act 5, she starts demanding for equality and respect. She says that, "I want a little kindness. I know I'm a common ignorant girl and you a book learned gentleman, but I'm not dirt under your feet." She starts resisting. And furthermore, she also demands independence. She says, "I'll let you see whether I'm dependent on you. If you can preach, I can teach. I'll go and be a teacher." And then Higgins asks out of fury, yelling at her, "What'll you teach in heaven's name?" And she replies, "What you taught me. I'll teach phonetics." And Higgins laughs at her. And she replies, "I'll offer myself as an assistant to Professor Nepean." And racing in fury, again he says, "What? That impostor, that humbug? Teach him my methods, my discoveries? You take one step in his direction and I'll wring your neck." And he puts his hands on her as if he'll pull her neck, and he says, "Do you hear?" And defiantly she replies, "What do I care? I know you'd strike me someday." And she walks out. So there are plenty of such scenes. I've just taken a few for you for your understanding and appreciation. And I hope I have somewhat covered the basics of Pygmalion. And tomorrow, in our next class, we'll discuss Murder in the Cathedral, the poetic drama by Thomas Stern Eliot. And the day after, we'll look back in anger. And after that, we'll deal with Waiting for Godot. And if we get time, we'll go back to some other plays, or I would like to spend a class or two discussing how to write an annotation as well as how to write essays. So I'll spend hopefully the last class for that, and I'll also have doubts, if any, by the time you reach the fag end of these sessions. So that somewhat sums up my session for today. And I do understand that it was in two ranges. Initially you had a series of videos which would have excited you. Then over the last 40-45 minutes, I had to slightly bore you with my lecture, so apologies for that. But then this is one method that I could cling to today, also because of the shortage of exemplary performances of Pygmalion elsewhere. I did search for the videos, but then somehow I didn't get a video which I felt I could show you. And that's also a reason why I had to go on banking on my narration skills rather than anything else. But of course, there is this movie which you may go back to, and if you want to, you can go back and have a look at this. Just give me a second. I'm trying to share the link with you. This is not exactly the play, but it's a modern interpretation of the play, and it's an adaptation perhaps. And I'm sharing that link with you as well. And just in case somebody has forgotten to mark the attendance, I'm sharing the attendance link
Is
with
it
you
My
too.
Fair Lady?
So yeah, it's My Fair Lady. Yep. It's a popular work. It's not that you need me to say that, but nonetheless, yep. I've shared the link with you for those who would like to have a look at that. And I have also once again shared the link of the attendance just in case you missed out on that too. All right, so now the floor is open. If you have any queries, we have close to 7 minutes for discussion. If you have any queries, you may feel free to ask. The
Sir,
floor is open.
would you like to put some points over the protection of romance on the basis of the play Pygmalion, sir? It,
Uh,
uh,
Pygmalion is often also seen as a romance. And again, because we don't have time today, I would like to tell you that go back to your blocks. It has been extensively dealt with in the play, in the blocks. There are a few features, and how the play serves as a romance can also be seen there. And by romance, don't even take it in a literary sense. It also means that the way the theme has been handled, you have romance novels, for instance. So it is an extended prose with the theme of love. And here it's always a skeptical thing. How far can you consider Higgins and Eliza to be in love? Because you would see that there is always a dominant relationship between two, a sort of a master slave relationship, also facilitated by the class hierarchy. Higgins is a flourished phonetician, and Eliza is a flower girl. So there is always this jug and mug or master slave dynamics to their relation. And even though we have some hints here and there to say that Higgins has romantic intentions towards her, it could also be purely physical. But at times it's also said that he's least interested in the femininity or womanhood of Eliza. He's more concerned about her as a subject whom he molds to become a flourished duchess. So there are different arguments. You may read those arguments in the critical forums as well. That would give you a deep insight on how to look at Pygmalion as a romance. And I also forgot to mention the myth of Pygmalion. There is this sculptor called Pygmalion who made the thing of a lady. He fell in love with the sculpture that he made, and he prayed to Aphrodite, the goddess of love, to give life to that statue. And it was listened to, and he married that statue and lived forever with it. So that's where the title takes from. It could have very well been the life and making of Eliza Doolittle, or class struggle, or whatever else could have been a befitting title. So Pygmalion is more about the furore over that myth in that times. There are other playwrights who have experimented in similar lines. So Shaw takes it to expose the lingua franca, or the cultural stratification existent in the in that period in English society, and it has somewhat succeeded in that regard as well.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes, Nirupama.
Usually, when you say I stand on the shoulder of the giants, that means to say that learning from them. I mean, taking their lessons as the base, I'm learning further. So,
Yep.
how do you say that it's an insult when you say that I'm on his shoulders?
The insult is where he says, "I'm taller than Shakespeare." He, in that lecture, I check that link and give you the details if I can. So in that lecture, what Shaw does is, Shaw tries to speak about Shakespeare, and he tries to expose Shakespeare as a lewd, obscene playwright. He portrays Shakespeare as someone who is not ideal to be called a playwright because of this didactic function that Shaw attaches to his plays. He believes Shakespeare to be an inferior character, and that's why it sounds to be abusive. And trust me, back then when he did this, a lot of people were taken aback by the crude tone with which Shaw expressed this. And that's why I am taller than Shakespeare, I sit in his shoulders, are termed to be offensive by some critics. Yes, there are critics who still try to cover it up, saying he is speaking about the lineage and he is taking the baton forward. Fine, but then it's also interpreted, because there are plenty of Shakespearean references in his plays where he criticizes a lot of Shakespearean characters, dialogues, formulations, and so on. And that's why people look at Shaw as anti-Shakespearean.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yep, Nirubala. Anything else anybody would like to ask? We had a 2-day break, and maybe that's why we have a fallout in terms of attendance today. We have close to 65, 70 people today as opposed to 80. I hope others would return hopefully by tomorrow. And mind you, we have 4 more sessions after this, and hopefully we'll be able to touch a few more plays and the landmarks too. And I had given you so many keywords today, so please go search for those keywords and have a self understanding regarding those keywords. That will help you appreciate theater better.
So you talked about Lisa being a feminist, but then more to her speaking out, voicing out her opinions. It's more of an actions. Like she cries a lot, and she
Yep,
throws a fit every now
yep,
and then when she
yep.
cannot react. So can we term that as being a feminist?
No, not necessarily. So that's why when I began, I had told you this. Among those questions that you have for your assignment, only this question is somewhere you can have your opinion. The other 8 questions are straightforward. You Google that, you will get the answers. But the peculiarity of question number 5 is that, is she a feminist or not? It's up to you to say. So what I summed up for you is critical discussions which state that she is a feminist. But then you must also note that these theories are not rooted on any of the treatises on feminism. So the fact that Eliza cries or she is subversive right from the beginning, even though you can blame class structure for that, does not account for her to be called a feminist. Yes, you can also argue the other way and say that because of dash and dash and dash and dash, she is not a feminist. And it is out of her necessity that she has to finally walk out of Higgins. because of self-respect. But self-respect does not mean you are a feminist, because she is again going to a man, and her future, she believes, is in the hands of another man. So is that really the basic tenet of feminism, is something that you need to ponder over. So that's open to you. But then I'm just giving you the critical perspectives. That's all. Yes, Jijimol, that's what I said. The word Pygmalion is based on a Greek myth. And let me just, I've explained that already. So because Jijimol is from Kerala, I'm taking a couple of minutes to describe that to her in Malayalam. Jijimol, what happens is, Greek myth പ്രകാരം ഒരു ശില്പി ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു. ആ ശില്പി ഒരു സുന്ദരിയായ പെൺകുട്ടിയുടെ പ്രതിമയുണ്ടാക്കി. അപ്പൊ ആ പ്രതിമ ഉണ്ടാക്കി ശില്പിക്ക് തന്നെ ആ സൗന്ദര്യത്തോട് ആസക്തി തോന്നി. അപ്പൊ അയാള് ഗ്രീക്ക് ദേവതയായിട്ടുള്ള അഫ്രോഡൈറ്റിനോട് പ്രാർത്ഥിച്ചു, ഈ പ്രതിമയ്ക്ക് ജീവൻ കിട്ടിയിരുന്നെങ്കിൽ എനിക്ക് അവളെ സഖിയാക്കാമായിരുന്നു എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞിട്ട്. എന്നിട്ട് ഇയാൾ വീട്ടിൽ പോയപ്പോഴേക്കും വീട്ടിൽ ഈ പ്രതിമ ജീവൻ വെച്ച് ഒരു സുന്ദരിയായ പെൺകുട്ടിയായി ഇയാളുടെ മുമ്പിൽ നിൽക്കുക. ആൻഡ് ഇയാൾ ആ പെൺകുട്ടിയെ വിവാഹം കഴിക്കുന്നു. ദിസ് ഇസ് ദ ബേസ് ഓഫ് ദ പിഗ്മാലിയൻ മിത്ത്, which Shaw adapts here. But here we are not sure whether Higgins wants to marry Eliza or not, but then he grooms Eliza to be a flourished duchess. So that's the difference there. All right. So in that case, if there are no queries, we can call today. Anything